Section 2.1. In this section, we'll learn to represent and interpret a linear function, determine if a linear function is increasing, decreasing, or constant, find and interpret the slope of a linear function, write the point-slope form of an equation, and finally, write and interpret a linear function. So linear functions are ones that model constant change over time. So the idea there, it's really important, is that the change is constant. So here are some examples. A worker gets paid $15 per hour. That means for every hour, there's a constant rate of $15. A car travels 65 miles per hour. In other words, for every hour, the car travels a constant rate of 65 miles per hour. In equation form, we could write the first one as y is equal to 15 times x, and in the second one, we can write that as y is equal to 65 times x. Function form is very similar, except that instead of using the value y, we replace that with function notation. So in function notation, the first one could be f of x is equal to 15x, and in function notation, the second one could be f of x is equal to 65x. So linear functions, or actually all functions, can be represented in three different ways. First, it could be represented in a table. Secondly, it could be represented in a graph. And finally, it could be represented with an equation. And so what we'll do is we'll practice getting used to all of these forms of a function, of a linear function. So let's take a look at an example. Interpreting a linear function. The pressure P in pounds per square inch, or called PSI, on a diver depends on the depth of the water. The relationship is described by the equation P of D equals 0.434 D plus 14.696, where P of D is the pressure and D is the depth in feet. Explain what this means in words. So this is an example of a linear function. You might remember the form y is equal to mx plus b. So b, remember, is your y-intercept. That's the value of the function when x is equal to 0. So let's think about that for a second. What is our input variable? Our input variable is the depth of the water. So what this tells us is that at surface, in other words, where depth is equal to 0, you haven't dived yet, the pressure on a diver at the surface of the water is 14.696 psi, pounds per square inch. This other number here, the number in front of D, is the slope. And remember, what is the slope? Slope is the change in your y variable over the change in your x variable. In other words, it's the change in pressure over the change in depth. So for every foot that the diver descends, we know that the pressure increases by 0.434 psi, pounds per square inch. So that would be what the function means in words. Find and interpret P of 3. All right, so we ask what's P of 3. This means that the depth is going to be 3 feet. And what we're going to find is the pressure on the diver 3 feet down. So we would have, that would be equal to 0.434 times 3 plus 14.696. So let's take out a calculator and do that. So if we take out a calculator and multiply 0.434 times 3, and then add on 14.696, we get a result of 15.998. And so what that means is at a depth of 3 feet, the pressure on the diver has increased to 15.998 pounds per square inch. All right, let's take a look at another example. The average income in dollars for the year 2000 to 2010 is given by this function. M of x is equal to 1054x plus 23,286, where x is the number of years after 2000. Explains what this function means in words. So remember, let's start here. This is your y-intercept. So when x is equal to 0, m of x, the function, is equal to 23,286. Now what is x? X is the number of years after the 2000. So when x is 0, what that means is we're 0 years after the year 2000. In other words, in the year 2000, so let me insert the word year so that doesn't look so strange. So in the year 2000, average annual income was $23,286. Now the other number in the problem, the equation, is the slope. So remember, what is the slope? Slope is change in y over change in x. In other words, change in income over change in years. So let's think about that. That's 1,054 over 1. So every year, average annual income was increasing by $1,054 per year. So that's finding and explaining what the function means in words. Next, find and interpret m of 5. So m of 5, if x is 5, remember x means the number of years after 2000. So m of 5 means we're talking about the year 2005. So in 2005, when we find m of 5, what that's going to tell us is what the annual income was. So we'll take 1,054 times 5 plus 23,286. And if we take a calculator and compute that, 1,054 times 5 plus 23,286, we'll get a value of 28,556. So in 2005, the average annual income was $28,556. So just to recap, when you explain what a linear function means or interpret it, you want to talk about two numbers, first the y-intercept and then the slope. All right, so I think here's one for you to try.